Everyone. Um, Welcome to this session. It's a great honor to be moderating this with three extremely accomplished, experienced superintendents, all originally TFA Corps members. They have very diverse experiences and perspectives that they're going to share as we talk. And I just wanted to ask each of them to introduce themselves and give us their Corps year and region, current role and responsibilities, and summarize your superintendent experience.
Let me start. Hey, everybody. Thanks for letting me come up here and speak. Thanks for being here. It's an honor to be on the panel with two people I respect a lot and consider really good friends, so I'm happy to be here. My name's Chris Barbick, and I'm a 92 Houston Corps member. My current role is I'm unemployed. I'm the former superintendent of the Achievement School District, and while I was there, I served with Kevin Huffman, who's also a 92 Houston Corps member, and I was part of the team that implemented the Race to Top grant. And my specific role was to build the Achievement School District, which was essentially building a school district inside the Department of Ed that was focused on the priority schools. And in the 4.5 years there, we restarted about 30 schools and built the infrastructure to authorize new schools, support the schools that were open, and then hold them accountable for performance.
Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Kaya Henderson. I'm a 1992 New York Corps member, and my current role is I'm the Chancellor of DC Public Schools, where I have the pleasure of serving 50,000 students and families in our nation's capital. Welcome to Washington. Let's see, I guess I've been Chancellor for 5 years in DC, and I was Deputy Chancellor before that for 3.5.
Good afternoon. I'm John White. I'm 1999 Jersey Corps. See, you got to give Jers the shout out there. Yeah. All right, Jers. I was also Executive Director of Teach for America Chicago. All right, Chicago. And I was Deputy Chancellor of the New York City school system. I've been in Louisiana for 5 years. I'm the state superintendent of schools in Louisiana. We have 800,000 kids in our system. I think what I love most about my job in a way is that I get therefore to kind of play at 3 levels. Among my 49 colleagues in the states, we've worked very hard on the recent federal legislation. Obviously, I work at the state level, overseeing 64 parish school systems. And in Louisiana, we get to do a lot of work locally. We oversee, at the state level, the operations of the public schools in New Orleans and a large share of the public school system in Baton Rouge. And I'm thrilled to be in my hometown today of Washington, D.C.
And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Dale Russakoff, and I wrote a book called The Prize about Mark Zuckerberg's $100 million gift to the Newark schools and the effort to turn around that very struggling district. We're going to start with just 3 minutes from each of the panelists, addressing the big topic of this session, which is how should school systems evolve to meet the needs of today's students and families. So you want to go in the same order, Chris?
Sure. Well, I think that to start, I think we need to ask a slightly different question. I think the question that we need to ask is how does public education evolve? Because I think it's important for us to make the distinction that public education is a set of principles, right? That everybody has a tuition-free school, that it's non-discriminatory, that we're preparing kids for the future, participate in democracy. A district is just a form of delivery of how we deliver that public education to kids, right? And so we think about what's going on right now. I mean, we have democracy. In Iowa, we caucus, and in New Hampshire, we have primaries. But it's still 2 different delivery systems of democracy. I think we need to think about public education in the same way. So I think number one, we have to think about the district as an operator of schools and not the operator of schools. And that we have a governance structure that gives all those operators inside that district the same flexibility around things like program and staffing and budget and length of school day and length of school year. 2, I think that all schools, regardless of type, have to be held to the same standards of performance, right? So I think, depending on where you are, district schools may be held to one standard, different types of schools may be held to different standards of performance. And I think we have to operate in a system where all public school operators, regardless of type, are held to the same standard. I think 3 is we have to continue to evolve a system where families have multiple choices of public schools, and that also includes a great public school in their neighborhood, so that when a family chooses a school, they're choosing a school for a very specific reason, purpose, or program, and that they're not fleeing their neighborhood school because it's a terrible school. And then I think finally, we need to evolve to a system where a primary function of the system is to create a pathway for educators to open the school of their dreams. That we create a nice pathway and that we're starting those schools so that I think two things happen. One, it becomes an engine of innovation. And I think two, it's knowing that talent's the name of the game. It's a way that we keep talent in the system. So I think those are kind of the 3 or 4 sort of broad stroke things I would say as we think about how public education needs to evolve in the future.
So I've thought a lot about this, I think, over the last 8.5 years in DC public schools, where we've gone from being one of the lowest performing school districts in the country to the fastest improving. And I think that one of the most important things that any school system or system of schools needs to do is really reflect the desires and aspirations of the families that they serve. I think for a long time in education, our position has been, we are the experts. Drop your kid off in pre-K, we'll deliver him in 12th grade, and it'll all be good, he'll get a job, and things will be great. And that's actually not how it works anymore. Parents are actually real partners, and parents have particular wants and needs for their children that are not always the things that we prescribe. And I think that one of the main ways that public schooling needs to evolve is we need to engage our parents and our families in the work that we do. I also think that at the end of the day, part of what we need to recognize is that while there are principles around public education, I think different people want different things out of the public education system. And one of the things that I think we have to figure out how we get everybody to want and focus on is equity. I think one of the founding or key principles of a public education is that it's for the public, it's for all. And yet and still we've set up systems, whether they're traditional districts or charter school systems, that serve some kids or the kids that we want to serve, and not all kids at the same level. And so I think one of the biggest things that we all have to struggle with is how we provide every single kid with a world-class education, regardless of background or circumstance. That is something that, while principally philosophically underlies the public education system, it's not something that I think we are acting on with the will that's necessary to deliver. Finally, I think we're in a watershed moment in education, and I think we're not really talking about it. We say things like, well, we're introducing new standards, higher standards, greater expectations. In fact, we're asking people to teach very differently than we've ever asked them to teach before. But we're kind of masking that in it's just Common Core, right? No, everything is up in the air. Personalized learning, governance, structures, everything is up in the air in education. And I think that we've got to have a more candid conversation and really engage in the intellectual struggle around what we want for schools in this country, whether we want to perpetuate the public school system that was created, quite frankly, for a handful of landowners' children, but not for all kids, and how we really recreate a set of schools or systems of schools that meet the needs of everybody. And we have to be candid with teachers about what we want them to do. We have to be candid with families about the role that they need to play. We have to be candid with politicians about what it actually takes to get there. And I think we need to get real about that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you both have said. I don't know if any of you were in the session this morning that I was a part of. I thought Dave Levin said something that was so good, and I hadn't really thought of it in these terms, but he talked about how in his schools they make a promise to kids who are now pre-kindergarten kids, formerly just middle school kids, that if they go through their program, they will be in a position to live the life they want to live. And that the distinction between making a promise to kids and families and just running a public education system there's a huge difference. And I do think what he said is so true, because when I see the day-to-day work of educators across the country, largely, and I think we're all guilty of this, largely we are consumed with the business of public educating or public education, and not with everything that would be necessary to deliver on something that is as simple as a promise that if you go through our system, you will be in a position to make your life what you want of it. And that is a simple concept, but all of the stuff of public education gets in the way of it. And at its essence, if there were one thing that I were to ask of all of our systems in our state and in any other state, it would therefore be have a plan to deliver on your promise. And I think we need to start there. Most school systems, whether you're an all-charter district like New Orleans, whether you're the most traditional district in the country, most systems in America couldn't really tell you exactly what their plan is to deliver on kids' promises. Then we need to start there. I mean, there are 14,000 school systems, and that is a real problem, that most places don't really have a plan. And secondly, even where there are plans, there's not really typically the simplicity and the coherence to communicate that plan to principals, to communicate that plan to teachers, and to communicate that plan to parents. We have the most fragmented, multi-layered, confusing, mishmash education system of any developed nation on earth. And so if we're really talking about, what should a school system do to get itself in the right place to serve the needs of families and kids, I think it comes down to that simple equation. Whether you're a portfolio district, traditional district, online district, whatever you want to be, what's your promise? What's your plan? And have you cleared all the junk out enough so that you stop being consumed with just being a public educator and actually talking with people about what needs to happen for their kids?
I think I'd like to jump to a question we were going to get to later, because you all have kind of raised this question of what is the role of governance in fulfilling the promises for kids that John was just talking about. There's charter, there's an all-charter district, there are portfolio districts, there are districts that are fighting between charters and the district model, all-district model. What do each of you think the model of governance, the best model of governance is to help the most kids or help all kids?
Well, let me say this. I think it starts with recognizing that we have an uncommon governance structure of education in this country, and we do need to understand that. It's not normal to have the number of layers that we have, and it is a serious factor in our inability to move the system forward when faced with big challenges. There are not other systems in the developed world that have the tradition of local control that we have, and where 14,000 essentially political organizations called school boards are the organizations that determine, for the most part, perhaps thankfully not in Washington, but for the most part in the rest of our country. So it is abnormal. So I think there's a couple of questions. One, is that an issue that education policy and reformers really care about? And I think it's fair to say that if you believe that school boards aren't successful as a model, then that's an important policy issue that should be considered. But the reality is it's not going to change anytime soon. So we'd better figure out how to run traditional districts and at the same time acknowledge that schools that do operate independent of traditional schools have a place in that. All of which is to say that I don't know that having the discussion about, well, should we or shouldn't we have school boards is really a relevant question. We're going to have school boards. Within that structure, however you can attract the best leaders, the best teachers possible, that's the strategy then that you should go with. And I think in many cases, independent schools, certainly New Orleans is a big example of that, I think have been successful in getting there. But it's not to say that that's a totally scalable answer. It's not to say it's the only answer. But however it is, we're going to have to work within the traditional system to get the best principal, the best teachers there, no matter the governance structure.
I wanted to ask Kaya in particular, what is the future shape of public school districts in cities where charters are growing so aggressively?
So I think so first let me answer your first question, which is which governance model. And I actually don't believe that there will ever be a one-size-fits-all governance model. I think given the history of federalism and the fact that states get to decide what they want to do with education and how they do it, you're always going to have lots of different kinds of governance models. And to some extent, I actually think we're in an experimentation phase where we're trying on different governance models. We have school boards, we have mayoral control, we have charter schools and systems, and I think if you leave it to us, there will probably be a few other options that we haven't already determined, and I think that's okay. I do think, though, that in whatever governance model, there's an obligation to make sure, and like I'm going to be a broken record on like all kids, but to make sure that all kids have the appropriate access. And I think in Washington, D.C., we are in a context where 55% of the students in public education are in the traditional school district and 45% are in charters. And what's fascinating is, and I'm just going to tell the straight up truth, we've created two pretty identical districts. We're about the same size. We both have some rockin' schools, right? We both have some really struggling schools, and we both have a lot in the messy middle. And I think what that tells me is governance matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. And if you just change governance, there's no guarantee that you'll get any different results. Schooling is hard, and we mess around with all of the stuff around it, right, without really getting to the heart of teaching and learning, which is really hard. Charter school educators and traditional school educators struggle with teaching and learning. Charter school operators and traditional operators struggle with human capital, right? Like the schooling is hard. And I think the governance thing is a red herring for policymakers and people who don't want to get in the arena and do the hard work, which is teaching and learning. And so we play around with policy and governance and that kind of thing. Ultimately, I think we've got to have systems where whatever the governance model, we're hitting all kids. So in Washington, D.C., we've had these two sectors, and we're now at a point where we're both so big. We're all doing great work, but there are still lots of kids in Washington who are not getting an excellent education. And so at some point, we've got to, as a city, we are at this point saying, okay, we've had this experiment going, but how do we actually bring all of this together in a way that makes sense to ensure that every single kid in every single neighborhood has access to a great school? That is what we haven't figured out yet. And no particular governance model is, I think, has the answer to that question.
Let me just ask one specific more thing from Kaya is in these sometimes hybrid school districts, what do you think is the specific value of the traditional public school district?
Well, I mean, I can speak about Washington, D.C., where for 50 years, students and families were fleeing the traditional public school system. They were leaving to the suburbs, they were leaving to private schools, they were leaving to the ever-expanding charter sector. I'm really proud to say that for the last 4 years, we've seen 4 consecutive years of enrollment growth in DCPS. And I think that signals that parents see something good and different and desirable happening in DCPS, and so many of them are choosing to come back to the district. I think traditional districts have a very important role to play because 95% of kids in the country are in traditional school systems. When I was finishing my Teach for America commitment, I watched all of my friends going off to start charter schools, which is great and wonderful. And I kept asking myself, who's going to be responsible for the kids who stay in the traditional school district? Don't they deserve innovative educators? Don't they deserve, the will and the passion that I watched people sort of leaving the district? Don't they deserve to have that as well? And so I have, spent the vast majority of my career, all of my career, fighting for working in traditional school districts because that's where kids are. And I think the charter sector is important. There are lots of lessons that we learn. I think that families don't give a hoot, right? They don't care if it's a traditional school or a charter school. And I think that's important. But at the end of the day, I feel very passionate about the kids whose parents can't apply, can't get in the lottery, can't figure out the lottery, can't volunteer 10 hours, or, kids who can't be served in those kinds of schools. And I think that the same level of talent and dedication and resources and whatnot need to be applied at the traditional district level. And my worry, frankly, is that we see charter schools as a panacea, and so I watch philanthropy flock to charter schools, and I watch policy flock around charter schools, and we're leaving behind 95% of kids. You know how long it will take charter schools to get to the point where they can serve all kids in the country? Like, I can't even imagine it. And so in the meantime, there are kids sitting in districts every single day who need great teachers, who need support, who need whatever. And so I think traditional districts are incredibly important.
Okay. Should we let Chris talk about
Can I just say, so I agree with all that, and I think there's actually an opportunity for what I would call a third way. So, the way we set the ASD up in Memphis was, essentially all the Achievement School District is, it's a collection of school operators, right? We have 14 different public school operators, including ourselves. We run a small network of schools, but every single charter in our district, and we have 13 different ones, is running neighborhood schools. So instead of this idea of let's run a charter school in the neighborhood, we're saying let's run the neighborhood school like a charter. And in fact, let's have a charter school operator convert that neighborhood school and be the neighborhood school operator in that community. And I think, same kids, right? Different operator. And I think it's a third way, and quite frankly, I think it's the only way we're really going to get to the kind of growth and scale that we're talking about. And when we see operators who are stepping up and doing that and raising their hands saying, yes, we are going to change our model. Yes, we are going to serve all kids. No, there will not be an application, or all the things that we know happen when certain charters are doing enrollment practices. And we were very, very strict about making sure that they followed that. And it was a rough start. A lot of these guys got punched in the mouth the first couple of years, but I think the bet that we wanted to make was that a smaller, nimbler organization is going to get better faster than a large bureaucracy can. And that's exactly, if you look at the results over time and how the schools have improved, is exactly what's happening. And I think we need more high-performing organizations, more high-performing charters to start to dip their toe in that water and do the really hard work of serving all kids. And we also need to have incubators that are finding great educators in the system and helping them find that pathway and that runway to create the school of their dreams. And I think when we do that, we can stay above the charter district fray and actually have charters doing the hard neighborhood turnaround school work that it takes to get to that day where we are serving all kids.
You want to?
I do think it's important that we acknowledge that literally every one of us is on this stage because a governance change was made, however. At the end of the day, the reason we can have faith that D.C. public schools will be run better than it was when I was growing up in D.C. originated with a governance change. The reason I worked in New York under a great chancellor originated with a governance change. The reason you were able to do what you did in Memphis, Chris, is because of a governance change. So I don't want us to forget that where there is really, really bold vision being enacted in urban public schools, especially in this country, it largely originated with a governance change. New Orleans and the results, the improvements in New Orleans for all of their challenges started with a governance change after a horrific man-made disaster. And on the other hand, you can acknowledge that school boards as the fundamental way in which schools are run in this country probably is not going to change across 14,000 units in any wholesale way anytime immediately soon. We need to work thus within the traditional structure, just as we acknowledge that governance can be a profound lever to start the change process.
Picking up on that, another thing we were going to talk about is the tension between making change as aggressively as possible and making room for the community voice so that there's not a sense of reform being done to a community, but being done with the community. And I just wanted to get each of your reflections on that and based on your experience.
I'll start. That tension certainly existed in our work. There's no doubt about it. I think the way the question's asked kind of implies what the answer is. I mean, the reality was we had a grant, and there was a very specific start date to that Race to the Top grant. There was a very specific end date to that Race to the Top grant, and there were expectations of how far down the road we needed to be in terms of restarting schools and opening schools. And I think when you combine that with just the urgency that we all come to this work with every day, I mean, there were 85 schools in the bottom 5% in Tennessee where 1 in 6 kids was reading on grade level, where the average ACT score was 14, where 4% of the kids were college ready. So when you wake up every day knowing that's what you're trying to work to help with a lot of other people solve for, I mean, you're like raring to go. You want to open up schools, and I think the tension that we had to work with is, I remember I started August 1st, and within 2 weeks, I mean, I remember sitting talking to Kevin. He's like, "Man, we got to open up 15 schools next year." And I was like, "No, we're not, because that won't work." We opened up 6, but we didn't take the time on the front end, I think, to create the kind of parent demand that I think is so important and is lacking in a lot of places. That eventually happened. You'll see later tonight at the Verizon, an organization that's about a year old now called the Memphis Lift, which is a parent group that's run by parents, it's led by parents. They're educating other parents on what it means to be in a priority school. They're educating communities on what those choices are, what their options are, what it potentially means for a school to be on the priority school list. But most importantly, they're not advocating for an agenda. They're not advocating for the district. They're not advocating for the ASD. They're not advocating for charter. They're not advocating for additional school. What they're advocating for is they know that the school they send their kids to every day isn't good enough, and they want something better. And whoever that public school operator is, they're going to hold that group accountable. And I think we need more of that type of work happening in communities. We need more, Memphis Lift type of organizations. And I think if there were, there's a lot of things I wish I could go back and do over again, but I think one of them is if we had been able to spend a little bit more time on the front end creating that parent demand, I think we could have minimized some of the backlash. Not all of it, because anytime you make decisions, there's just going to be people that aren't happy with the decision that you make. But I think we could have spent more time investing on that in the front end of the work that we did.
Kaya?
I think that part of how we do our work matters as much as what we do in our work. And I think what we've learned is when you bring the community with you in doing the work, you get farther and it lasts longer. Tom Friedman, who wrote The World is Flat and a bunch of other things, said to me once, Kaya, my worry about Teach for America is sort of like my worry about Afghanistan, where when people come into a community and work on it, without engaging the local people in the rebuilding of that community, then when the people leave, it all falls apart. And I wonder if Teach for America is really focusing on ensuring that we do the work with the community, and that thing stuck with me. And so in Washington, what we try to do is engage the community on solving this problem of fixing the education system with us. I say all the time, we are DCPS and we can do this, but we can't do it alone. And so when we make very hard decisions, we involve the community. A classic example is we had to close schools twice now in the 8.5 years that I've been in DCPS, and they were markedly different processes. In 2007-8, when we did it, we released a list of schools that were going to be closed. It was 26 schools. We had 26 community meetings on the same night at the same time. We heard from the community, but we didn't respond. We didn't engage. It was wild. And we had protests, and oh my gosh, I was like, never again. It was like the worst time of my life. And then in 2013, when we closed schools, we did it in a completely different way. We put out a proposal around which schools we wanted to close and why. We showed how much we were spending at these schools and what we could get on the other side if we closed or consolidated. We put all the data out publicly so that parents and families could see, and then we said, okay, what should we do? And parents were able to say, I really don't want to close my school, but if I can get art, music, and PE, which I don't have right now, like, I get it, I'll take that. And close this school, but not that school, because there are, turf issues in these neighborhoods and blah, blah, blah. And we came up with solutions together. And I even had to tell my staff, like, don't get married to our proposal. This is just the best thinking that we have with the data that we have. But the community has data. They have different data, and it's valuable data. We're not the smartest people in the room. When we put our data together with their data, then we'll get to the best answers. And then they don't have to say, I don't like Kaya Henderson's closing plan. You don't like our closing plan. That's a different story. But when we do it together, then we close schools. And literally, this was at the same time that Chicago had the teacher strike. They were closing schools in Philadelphia, and people were chaining themselves to the superintendent's door, and in DC, like, we didn't have any of that drama, because we came up with it was a very difficult thing that we had to do, but we did it with the community. Fast forward 2 years later, when we had to redraw the boundaries and feeder patterns in the city. Like, can you say about to be a race war, right? It hadn't been done since 1968. And we live in a very different city, but we pulled together a community task force. And again, we gave them all the data that we had, geopolitical maps and population projections and all of this stuff. And the task force came up with the redrawn boundaries. And they owned it so much, the city owned it so much, that we were in the midst of a mayoral race, and all three candidates said, oh, we're gonna scrap the boundary and feeder recommendations. And the Washington Post did a poll, and 62% of the people said, no, we need to stick with the boundary and feeder recommendations. Why? Because they weren't the chancellor's recommendations or DCPS's recommendations. They were the recommendations that we as a city had come up with for our schools. And so it might not go as fast as you want it to go, but in fact, I think you get better and more lasting change when you do this kind of work with the community.
Yeah. I think that's really good, and you've done an amazing job. And you've changed, I think, the way the rest of the country views that particular line of work. I would say, I think that sometimes people approach this particular question of community engagement as a communications and politics question, and not really realizing that what I take from what Kaya said is actually about the substance of the work that they're doing first, and doing good work. And out of that grows better communications and politics. It's not just about bringing in somebody to do some engagement. That's when we fail. It's actually about building institutions that are locally rooted. And I mean, that's the reality of it. And look, we've all been guilty of this. I think wanting so badly to get to a high-achieving institution, you neglect the complexity that is the institution. And I think over time, a lot of us have learned that actually, building on the assets that are in a community to build and rebuild a community institution is where you need to start. And my experience has been, when you do that, it's never easy, but it is easier.
I wanted to switch to the subject of poverty and its effect on learning and education. And I think that, one of the mantras in the education reform movement from the beginning was that poverty is an excuse for failure. But I think that all of you have had the experience of finding out that poverty is a real root cause of failure, too, for a lot of kids. And I'm wondering what you have done in your different jobs to address the consequences of poverty as a learning issue. Chris?
Well, I mean, I think in this role, my thinking evolved a lot. I mean, I think, it's a big difference between, I think, some of the stuff we've talked about around, the choice charter environment versus serving a neighborhood school and trying to transform a neighborhood school.
Yeah, would you be specific about that? Because you made a really interesting statement about that it's much easier to turn around or to achieve excellence in a choice environment as opposed to a neighborhood school. And so maybe you could bring that into your answer, too.
Sure. Well, I think for starters, when I think about, just to be specific about, the students that we served at Yes Prep versus the students that we served in the Achievement School District, it's the difference between immigrant poverty and generational poverty, which is very different poverty. And I think in that situation at Yes, doing the socio-emotional support that I think is critical to, creating the kind of foundation where kids are, coming to school ready to learn, that was probably more of a should do or a nice to do. I think in the work that we did in the ASD, what we learned pretty quickly is that was a must do, that we were never going to see the kind of gains that we wanted to see and the kind of achievement we wanted to see in our schools if we didn't do that. And by the second year, we started to pull together the resources and find the nonprofits and do the work so that we were partnering with the right groups. And when I think about the direct-run schools, our third-year results, we saw dramatic gains, double-digit gains in those schools that we didn't see the first 2 years because we knew that we needed to build that infrastructure, and we're able to successfully do that. So I think it's fundamental. And when going back to the kind of choice versus traditional, I think this is, an area of learning that the charters that we work with in Memphis are figuring out as well. And, when I first started this work and we were kind of thinking about what needed to be in place and, we were building this thing from scratch, I think in my mind, what I was thinking about was almost like a three-legged stool, right? We needed resources to get schools restarted. We needed the talent, and we needed, I'm blanking on the third thing, but what I realized was that the fourth thing that we were missing at the time was that we needed that wraparound support, and that was just as important as some of these other things. And I think it's been great to see in Memphis nonprofits emerge and kind of step up and start to fill that role, which I think goes back to kind of the original thing that we're talking about here, which is the district doesn't have to solve every problem itself. I think it's going out and finding those partners that can come in and work with you and be collaborative, because that's what they're thinking about from the time they wake up till the time they go to bed. And if you can find the right people, then you can solve that problem without having to feel like it's something that you need to do inside your own organization every single time.
Well, could I just ask you specifically, when you made the statement about how it's easier to achieve excellence in a choice environment than in the neighborhood school, are you saying that a more challenging population comes to the neighborhood school, and in a choice environment you have, like you said, the difference between immigrant poverty and generational poverty?
I think it's the difference between a family knowing that that option exists, that they're going through the process to apply to the school. I mean, there's just a basic level of functionality that exists in a family when they're going through, at least in the case of Houston, I know it's different in some cities, to apply to a charter school. That doesn't exist when you're running the neighborhood school. And to break it down in a classroom level, I would say, our classroom, and yes, of a classroom of 25, there may have been 3 to 5 students who were showing up every day with just serious trauma that they were dealing with that was getting in the way of them learning. In our schools in the ASD, that number may have been 15 to 20. So just the concentrations of what we were asking our teachers to deal with, the burden that created on the school, and then the infrastructure that needed to exist to try and lift that burden so that the teacher in the school could actually do their job. It's just a very, very different environment. And when you're operating like that, it's just it makes it harder to achieve the kind of results that it takes. It doesn't mean it's impossible, and our schools in Memphis are showing it, but I think what it's not is it's not the after-school TV special where the straight line's going like this that so many folks like to put in their glossy annual report and funders like to hear about. It's messier, and I think we have to be willing to give folks the time to learn how to do this, and to get messy with the work before we start to see the after-school TV special stories that everyone loves to talk about.
Thank you. Kaya?
If you want to go.
Oh,
Well, I do want to say, I don't want there to be a takeaway that choice is the same as managed choice. And I think that's an important distinction. Choice, unfettered in a way that's not managed, I think can lead to the imbalances that Chris is talking about. But that doesn't mean we need to trade the individual liberty of parents having a choice as to where their kids go to school to have equity of access.
Sure.
We can have both. It's a question of government playing its appropriate role of managing the choice process and ensuring that, whether it's individual schools or charter management organizations or traditional public schools,
Right.
actually share in accepting all kids.
But I think that's where the governance part comes in. And I think
Absolutely.
that's when we talk about the district of the future, we think less about the district operating every school and doing more of the kind of work you're talking about. What's the transportation system?
Yeah.
How does enrollment work? Are all kids getting served? What's happening with SPED? And that it's more of those kind of compliance and making sure people are doing what they're supposed to functions, and that you're dispersing the operating of the schools part out to various organizations, various nonprofits that can do that work. And so, the analogy we always talked about at the ASD as we were trying to get people's minds wrapped around this is that we were kind of the league office, right, in the NFL. We made sure that everybody was following the rules and that the systems of the league were in place. But each team had their own ability to, have their logo, draft who they wanted, run the scheme they wanted to run. And I think that's where, when we see the district trying to do all those things, be the operator and sort of the compliance manager and run enrollment and transportation, we've seen it. It doesn't work. And so we've got to start to find those other organizations that districts can partner with, so that the district is, like I said before, an operator of schools and not the operator of schools.
I think it's so important, from my perspective, to communicate what I think is, and to call out what is a false mantra, which is the idea that neighborhood zoned schools somehow equals equity. In a country whose housing patterns are drawn in a way that fundamentally has a racist and classist effect, you can't just say that, not Chris would say it, but it can't be said that neighborhood schools, which admittedly is the more traditional way of operating, somehow leads to greater equity than choice. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge that unfettered choice often leads to inequity. So how do you bridge those things? You bridge it by actually managing a system that's rooted in both equal access and the individual liberties of choice, especially for the poor.
Right. Amen.
I think the important piece of Chris's statement is that it's not an apples to apples comparison. And we throw around the district charter thing like we're both doing the same thing and somebody's outperforming somebody or whatever. It's not that simple. In fact, many of us are serving different kinds of kids in different families under different conditions with different resources. And so this kind of charters are outperforming districts or districts are outperforming charters, I think, is not the right conversation to have. The real conversation is, under what circumstances are we best able to support different types of families? Intergenerational poverty is radically different than immigrant poverty. But we don't even acknowledge that. We say we're serving low-income kids, and that's kids of color, right? But Latino communities are different from Black communities, and that doesn't mean that Latino kids can learn and Black kids can't learn. They all can, but they're facing different circumstances, and one Black community is not the same as another Black community. And so we got to get a little more sophisticated and nuanced in how we talk about the work that we do, and we got to stop comparing like kids are widgets all across the country, and some widget operator is better than another widget operator. My thing about poverty is, I think I think that nobody in the education reform movement ever thought that poverty was not an issue. And we get banged on the head like we were just so naive, we thought poverty wasn't an issue. Everybody knows that poverty is an issue. I think we fundamentally believe that education is a key lever to lift people out of poverty, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. I think we recognize that there are intersectionalities, right? I can't do my job well, especially for my lowest performing schools or my most challenged families, unless I'm in partnership with the Department of Health and the Department of Mental Health and, nonprofit partners and whatnot. But the question of whether schools and school districts can do it all the answer is clear. We cannot, right? But I do think that part of the reason why DCPS has been so successful over the last 8 years is because we've been able to outsource some of these other functions to people who are experts at it instead of trying to get expert at it ourselves. And so we need to get expert at teaching and learning. That is our core work. And in fact, school systems are so burdened because we also have to do X and Y and Z and Q. We aren't able to meet the mission of teaching and learning. And so I think this idea of partnerships, on the governance front, the simple fact that we are in a mayoral controlled school district means that the mayor can dispatch city services to my disposal in ways that other folks can't. Poverty is all of our problem. It's not the school district's problem, it's everybody's problem, and it takes everybody's work to be able to lift children out of poverty. Education is part of the answer. It's not the whole answer, and I think we're finally getting to the point where we're acknowledging all of the intersectionalities and being strategic about how we work together to leverage that kind of change.
I think you said something that was so good, which is that, you know, this whole idea that this is somehow surprising to anybody who's ever taught in a Teach for America classroom that poverty, and certainly intergenerational poverty, has an impact on student learning, that's surprising. I mean, that's a joke, and it needs to stop. I think the best way to stop it is to actually make wraparound services, services for those who need mental health issues, services for kids who are incarcerated. Let's make that a reform issue. I mean, let's be real. The youth services space, youth services, child development services, healthcare services, mental health services, those are, by and large in our cities and poor rural areas, disorganized and bureaucratic. It's not like the traditional system has figured it out in any of those realms. And that's not to lay blame, but it's in need of reform. So now that we've been doing this for 25 years, let's actually put in place the systems necessary to get kids who are incarcerated in education, to get them appropriately re-entered, to deal with students with significant disabilities, to take on mental health in our school settings legitimately. Let's make that a reform issue, stop being on the defensive, and start getting real about it.
Yep.
How would you do that?
Well, I think,
It's a great idea.
I think it starts. It's a good question. I mean, I think you know, it's different in every context, as Kaya said. I mean, you know, you may work for the mayor, and you may just be able to, you know, have a better partnership with the other agencies. In our context, I think it has to start by applying some of the same principles that we've done with schooling to the youth development and to the health sector and to the juvenile justice sector. And those things are about accountability, about figuring out how you capitalize and actually fund in a coherent way those systems, how you break down silos, organizational development, so you build effective organizations in that place. You know, there are ways of managing that sector, just like there are ways of managing our sector, and there are ways of beginning to make improvements. But so let's not sit around and talk about like we actually don't know how to do it. We just haven't invested in it. We haven't made it systemically a priority. But I think all of us who run schools, who run school systems, who teach, who serve in nonprofits, we all know it's there. And I think we need to start getting a move on that issue.
Can I give a quick example? So I think we had a big snowstorm here a week or so ago, right? And schools were closed in Washington for 3 school days. And for many of our young people, every time we close school for snow, like literally, well, I don't even get on the snow calls anymore because I'm like, my answer is open school, right? I don't care if 2 kids come, open school. Like many of our kids eat at school, right? Many of our kids have heat at school. There was an article in the Post a couple weeks ago about how many families in the district don't have heat during the winter. And they come to school to be warm. And so we decided that after 3 days, in fact, it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that there were kids who hadn't eaten for 5 days. And we decided, or that wouldn't have eaten for 5 days, and we decided that we're gonna figure out how to open 10 schools to feed people. And not just kids, like people, right? Whoever came in, because we had kitchens, we knew that not every street was plowed and not every school was operable, but we could get 10 places across the city up and running to feed people. And, you know, we fed 500 people the first day and 900 people the second day, and it was cool, and now we're trying to figure out how we do it every snow day so that, you know, our kids and our families eat. And like, what was so amazing to me is like people all over the country were like, that was so nice, and oh my goodness, and blah, blah, blah. And like, no, that's what's necessary in our context, right? In our context, that's how we need to get down. And being very honest about that is, I think, a place where we begin to explore the intersectionalities. And now I have nonprofits who are coming to say, food, you know, pantries and stuff, who are saying, we'll help you run schools and keep places open on snow days so that kids and families can eat. When districts can't do it all by themselves, or schools can't do it all by themselves, but when we acknowledge the intersectionalities, we open up opportunities for partnerships to get our kids and families the things that they need.
Oh, did you want to add to that?
No.
Oh, okay. John said something really interesting earlier about the fact that each one of you is in the position you are because there was a governance change. And that, but we've also seen where, you know, there's a political change, then the politics shifts, and there's another change, and it's really hard to sustain reform that starts under one administration when a very different administration comes in. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that, and particularly I'd like to start with John, who was working under a governor who had a lot of Tea Party support, who supported the Common Core. Then he didn't support the Common Core. Now there's a Democratic governor who has a lot of union support. How do you keep the process going, and basically how do you even keep your job when the political situation is so fluid?
I'm not really sure.
So far, so good,
Yeah,
right?
so far, so good. I think it's a couple of things. I think, one, you have to understand it's a political process, and there are people who are running for office, and some of those people are going to support you, and some of them are not, and you have to know and be effective in that context. So I think that's one thing. The other thing, though, is it comes back to what I think is, DC has done so well, and that is they have a long-term plan, and people actually, I think, want them to succeed, by and large. So when you don't just rely on political patrons for all of your support, with industry, with the community and families, with faith-based institutions, with the community as a whole, they are building support. And that lasts. I mean, that actually means something. Like, it turns out, I think, if you have a plan and people actually believe you're getting it done and it's starting to show results and you keep working it and working it and working it, politics aside, it matters to people. And I do think that we need to start insisting that reform jobs in government not just be 3 years and done. And we really, really need to rally around those places where that's happening. We need to make the sustainability of those teams a critical issue, and I think they've done a fantastic job, in large part because also they had good internal capacity, and they had somebody who could step up and continue to lead. And so even when there was a transition, not just in administrations, but in their own leadership, they had somebody waiting in the wings, obviously very capable to step up and do it. It's not rocket science. It's way, way, way undervalued, and it's important that we rally around those people who have a chance to give it a long-term go.
Kaya?
I'm on my third mayor, and I'm on my third mayor. I'm on my third union president. Maybe it's time for me to go. I think John is absolutely right. When I think about the first couple of years at DCPS, we didn't have a plan. We didn't have a plan. Well, our plan was get great people, right? Yeah, that's not a plan. But we weren't able to articulate to the community outside of we'll raise test scores what we were going to do and why and how long it would take. And I watched over the first couple of years, the first year our test scores went up. And it was like, woohoo! And then the next year our test scores were flat, or they went down the second year. And people were like, get those bums out of here, right? And then the third year they were kind of flat, and we were, literally public support was rising or falling on our test scores. And I was like, this is so crazy, right? Test scores are variable. Sometimes you have good years, sometimes you don't. We can't live or die on our test scores, but that's what we had set up as the proposition. And so when I came in as chancellor, I was like, we need a new proposition because I don't know how my test scores are going to be. We're going to create a 5-year plan. We're going to say by 2017, we will reach X, Y, Z, and Q. And we made 5 big goals. And effectively, what we were communicating to the community is, one, we have a plan. Here are the results that you can expect, but you can't expect them immediately, right? This is going to take a little time. And so even if we have a year where our scores drop, right, we could also still reach the goal by 2017. We're building infrastructure. We're training teachers. We have a new curriculum. That stuff takes a moment to gel and grow. And so by helping our constituents understand what we were doing, why we were doing it, and how long it would take, it gave us political cover, it gave us runway to do the work. And so when Mayor Fenty was not reelected and Michelle left, Mayor Gray asked me to step in as the interim, but he'll tell you this today. He says, look, I didn't like Michelle's style, but I never disagreed with what you all were doing because I understood where you're trying to go. And I think ensuring that people know where you're going is the thing that buys you the political cover. I think the other thing I'm very clear with all of my mayors about is I didn't come here to work for you, right? I'm not your chancellor. I am the chancellor of DC Public Schools. I came to work for kids. Now, I recognize that that is my boss. My job is to make my boss look good. There are certain things that, your boss will want that sometimes might be crazy, and sometimes you just got to go with that, right? That's being a grown-up, having a job. But at the end of the day, my real job is to articulate a plan and to get my bosses invested in that plan. And to date, we've been successful with 3 consecutive mayors. And I actually believe if I walked out of DC Public Schools tomorrow, the work will continue, because everybody knows what the plan is, everybody knows what the goals are, everybody knows what we're doing to get to the goals, and somebody from my team could step up. People from the city know how to hold us accountable because we've articulated this plan. And so I think John is absolutely right. We have to be able to lay out a clear plan and a value proposition around what we're going to deliver, and then we need to deliver it.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'm not sure how much I should say on this, given I'm the one person up here that's not in a job. I guess, on the one hand, I think it's too early to tell in terms of the specific work we've done in the ASD. I mean, it's 4 years old. But what I can say is that, I stayed a year after Kevin. There's a new commissioner there who's, is firmly behind the work that we're doing as Kevin was. There's a governor who's as all in today as he was 4 years ago. And I think that the true question on what's going to and I think most importantly is that we did think ahead about succession planning. I mean, the person that's taken over for me was my deputy. She was there from, almost day one and believed in the plan that we put in place and, has just provided a ton of continuity and peace of mind as I walk out the door. I think the real question in Tennessee will occur when, Governor Haslam's term's up in 2 years. But the optimist in me believes that the gains that the state has made over the last, 4 years now have been so dramatic. The change has been so dramatic. There's a feeling of possibility and a bar of excellence, and not just in a few places, but across the state in rural districts and big urban districts that just, quite frankly, didn't exist. And there's a level of talent inside the Department of Education today that didn't exist 4 years ago. And I left a month ago more optimistic about the work happening in the ASD, in Memphis, and more broadly across Tennessee than the day I started. And I think for a lot of people to do this work, whether it's 3 years or 4 years, to be able to say that is pretty rare. So I'm very hopeful about the continuity and the fact that the change and the reforms will continue.
Okay, great. We thought we would take some audience questions for them, for our panel, if people want to come to the microphones. Yes.
John White. How are you managing choice in New Orleans so that kids who need the most love are equitably distributed across the classrooms in New Orleans?
Well, I think there are a couple of important things. One, in my view, when you have a system where choice is the rule, where basically geographic boundaries, and we've made that choice, that geographic boundaries shouldn't be the thing that defines where you go to school. It should be where you want to go. But that the government does have to play a really, really strong regulatory role to ensure that when a parent wants access, they have it, that parents get good information about every school, and that it's an easy thing to apply to public schools. So that's first is government running it. Secondly, the same is true on the back end. Exiting from a school is an under-examined policy issue, but it's just as important in this perspective as is entering a school. And you need to make sure that there's really reasonable decisions, monitored decisions being made in that respect. The third thing I would say is we have to, in every place, make it an incentive for schools to serve the hardest to serve kids and not a disincentive. And right now, we're in the middle of a very difficult discussion in New Orleans, looking at the funding weight that comes with gifted and talented kids, as opposed to the funding weight that comes for kids with significant cognitive or orthopedic disabilities. And that's a very, very hard discussion, but it's the kind of discussion you have to have, because it can't just be the school system beating principals up over the needs of kids. You have to create an incentive and give the resources for principals to serve those kids in the first place.
We can hear
Let's
you.
do it.
My name is Marissa. I'm an alum and also work on staff at Oklahoma. And Mr. White, you kind of brought up the fact that so many of our systems have been built on racist and classist ideas. And so my question is, as we're thinking to the future, race, class, privilege has been a lot of our country's dialogue. Where does that dialogue play into how schools should evolve and operate for our students and families?
Well, I don't know that I've got a perfect answer in 2 minutes to that question. The question is how should race and class and the education thereof fit into our this question of what should schools do? And I would certainly, open that to. I mean, I would say I've been thinking about a couple of things. First, I do think that as it regards reporting on what's actually happening, I hope this new federal law will be used for states and cities to do more to highlight what's really happening. Because I think that Kaya's right. It goes beyond test scores. It's not just like, did your subgroups achieve AYP? It's actually being very transparent with the life outcomes that are being achieved in your community and in your state, and we need to start there. I'll say one other thing, and that is, as this is Black History Month, I've been thinking, I sort of took a look at our curriculum, and I really do think that, and I know this is happening in varying places, and I'm going to commit some time this year to really digging in on this question. We need to ask in the curriculum itself, what is being taught to our kids, and how are they being taught to think about this issue? And I want to say this again. I think that by and large, in most of our country, I know there's some people doing some incredible work on this, but I feel like my own education, I feel like the education we're administering in a lot of schools made the study of race issues seem like something you reached a certain point on, and then everything, it was kind of other than. Yeah, I'm good on that issue. I know about Martin Luther King, I'm good on that issue. We need to be doing something much deeper. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what that is exactly, but I'm committed this year to making a project of really trying to figure that out for us, and I'd love anyone's ideas on that question as well, but we have to change the curriculum and the experience of how kids understand that issue.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that and say, in addition to what kids are learning, I think we have to be focused on teaching kids to be advocates for themselves. I think we have to be really candid about what's going on. Our kids are watching the news and seeing what's happening all across the country. When Mike Brown was shot in Ferguson, we literally, school was starting a week later. And I said to my team, we need a Ferguson curriculum. And they were like, oh, what? I was like, we need a Ferguson curriculum because I got a kid at home who's asking me about Ferguson. He's 10 and I can't explain to him what's going on. And our teachers are gonna hit classrooms and kids are gonna come and wanna talk about what they're seeing. And so one, we have to be willing as educators to open up these very difficult conversations, even when we don't have all of the answers, but not act like they're not going on and not existing. And then we have to help students actually feel agency to do something about it. Our students are, I'm actually less confident in our ability to solve the race and class issues than I am in our students' ability to begin to address these issues, but we have to equip them to do that.
Thank you, guys. Hello, my name is Catherine Castillo. Thank you for being with us today.
Come on, Catherine, pick it up. Hello, my name is Catherine. Come on.
Sorry, all right. I think we all agree that wraparound services are important for our students and that they have many needs that go beyond just the academic. And just like you mentioned, that it can't fall completely just on the schools. We must also work to find partnerships in communities with other organizations. That work, though, I feel cannot fall on the teachers and administrators who already have existing roles and responsibilities, probably more than they can handle. So I'm curious to hear from your experience. Are there new roles developing in schools that you think are best practice, who can take charge of these issues and offload that work from educators?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I can tell you a little bit about what we've built in the 3 or 4 years in Memphis. I think there's 2 issues. One is just how do you know which organizations are good, and then once you know which organizations are good, how do you make it as easy as possible for teachers to be able to direct kids and families to those services? So the first thing we did was we partnered with an organization called RyCatcher, which essentially gave worked with us to build a database of all the different nonprofit social providers in the city. It was almost like a Yelp for nonprofits. So if I'm a social worker in a school and a family's coming into me with a certain issue, we could go to that, he or she could go to that database and see which organizations in the city actually did this and what did other people who use that organization have to say. So we could start to kind of get the good housekeeping seal of approval. Then what we did is we worked with some of our donors in Memphis to have what we called connectors on campus who were kind of like social workers, but they were actually people that lived in the community. And their job was to then, once that problem had been identified and a teacher or social worker had found that resource, the connector was then responsible for making sure that family connected with that resource, that someone followed up with them, and that the problem was actually getting solved. And so it wasn't the teacher who said, hey, look, my kid needs glasses. Now I got to figure out how to get the glasses. I got to drive the kid to the place to, the teacher knew that something was getting done, that somebody was following up, and they could get back to the instruction. And like I said, in the 2 years ago was our first year, we saw, scores go up dramatically because we were able to offload some of that work that teachers and folks in the school were doing with some of these partners. They knew they were going to quality partners, and there were folks in the community working in our schools to make sure that kids and families were getting what they needed.
Yep. I think we have similar roles that have evolved in our school system over time. We have assistant principals for intervention. Their job is to coordinate the supports that kids need and make sure that the right kids are getting to the right services. We've got social workers and psychologists. We have teacher leadership initiatives where teacher leaders are taking on roles to address specific issues in their school that they identify and that they then work on with a team. And so it's not always that all teachers don't want to be involved in these kinds of things. The question is, do they have the release time, or can we lighten their teaching burden so that they can do both? Because sometimes, in fact, having teachers involved in these kinds of processes and referrals actually make the intervention much more potent. I think one of the interesting things is this is what I feel like the role of central office is, right? I got a group of people whose job it is to figure out what the right supports are so that teachers don't have to figure it out. And, as much as people malign central offices or district offices, I watch even in the charter sector, there are home offices or centralized structures whose job it is to take the burden off of teachers. And I think it's a really important role.
We're going to have time for just one more question because we have to get to a concluding question for the panel. So would you ask your question?
Sure.
Sorry.
I'm Matt Leonard. I'm the Director of Data Strategy for Wake County Schools. And I was wondering, just similar to how the modern political campaign has harnessed the power of data and analytics to reach voters, how have you and how do you in your roles do that to reach parents and communities and students using data and analytics?
I'll go. So we use data for damn near everything at DC Public Schools, for decision making, for communication, for policy, and I'll give you a couple examples. In the example that I gave around closing schools or even around redrawing boundaries, we made all of the analytical data that we had and that we could harness from the city available to parents, right? We also use data to segment our communities. Not every community is the same, and so we look for trends across community. A perfect example, this week we announced that we're extending the school year at 10 schools, right? We surveyed parents to ask them, are you into extended day, extended year? If so, where, why, how? And we worked with school communities to only do it in the places where parents were supportive. And so we use data and analytics for communication purposes. A few years ago, we figured out that we needed to tell our own story and not rely on a newspaper. And so we figured out what are the best ways that parents hear from us. We could go to our parents directly. And so from our newsletters to text messages to all kinds of things, we communicate with our parents and we use data to inform those kinds of processes.
I'll just tell you quickly, I have been blown away by how superficially data is dealt with in many school systems and at the school level in many places. And it tends to be, oh great, we got this on our report card, boom, we're done, I'll see you next year. Or just about data-driven instruction, which often means just grouping kids. And honestly, as low-tech as it is, just having a strategy where with district superintendents and with principals, you're walking through pretty rudimentary data, subclaims on tests, that kind of thing, to formulate a general theory of what's actually happening and what thus should be worked on, that feels like one of the most important and revolutionary things we're doing, as obvious as it may be.
Thank you.
We have one last question for the panel, and it's a big one, and you're going to have to answer it quickly, unfortunately. But the question is, what is one piece of advice that each of you would give to a room full of educators about how to most quickly reach the goal of one day?
I'd just say two things. We've touched on a lot of issues here today, and I've loved this discussion because we've touched on a lot of things that aren't reform issues. I really hope that we start reforming non-reform issues. And I hope that whether it's childcare and wraparound services and incarcerated youth, whether it's enrollment and expulsion or whatever it is, going back and beginning to think about how do we build every element of this system that we need to get to a point where we can deliver on the answer to the question, Dale, that this panel is supposed to be addressing is huge. And more than anything else, I just hope we can dedicate our intellectual energies to the issues beyond the ones that for the last 10 or 15 years have been so all-consuming.
It's funny. I think two thoughts. One is, I feel like as much as we may be in a watershed moment, I feel like we lack a lot of fresh thinking. I feel like we're in some ways kind of stuck. And so, I always look to the classroom as a place for the solution, and I think we need more talent in schools. I mean, if I run into one more person who does policy or is an education consultant, I'm going to shoot myself in the head. I mean, we need people in schools and classrooms. That's the tip of the spear, and that's where the action is. And I think, if that means, and look, I get it, this work is hard. So if that means you got to tap out for a few months or a year to get back in, then do it. But I think, don't tap out forever, because we can have all the policies and consultant talent we want. If the talent doesn't live where the kids are, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I'm gonna co-sign on what Chris said. I think, when I think about all the progress that we've made in Washington, I think, yes, governance, yes, money, yes, whatever, but the real revolution has been in people, people who want to do this work, people in the classroom level, people at the deputy mayor level, people in the chancellor seat. One of my Teach for America friends said to me when I was the executive director of Teach for America DC, this is not going to change until a group of people like us go in and flood the system with the energy, the passion, the relentlessness, the stick-to-itiveness, the constant learning. It doesn't mean that we know all of the answers, but it means that we're going to die trying, some of us literally. And I think, talent is the game changer. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, teaching wasn't sexy to people coming out of college and university. It was for some people. Some people have always wanted to be teachers and whatnot. But the radical nature of Teach for America is that it inspired people who might never go into schools and communities to go into schools and communities. And we need that, more of that. Talent is what matters, and talent in the arena. My biggest worry about the reform movement, and I said it yesterday in a panel, and I'll say it again, and you'll tweet it, and people will say she said punks, blah, blah. But I'm worried that we cut and run when the going gets tough. And, that we don't stick to and through and keep trying to figure it out. And we need people to be in the arena, in districts, in charters, in schools, in state houses, in legislatures, at all of the different access points. We need people to be in it and to be unafraid to do the really, really hard work. Ultimately, people are the thing that make the world go round.
I just really want to thank this panel. It was such a powerful example of people speaking from the head as well as from the heart. And I think that you did an amazing job. Thank you. Thank you.